People like you took this country and turned it into a jail.
If you're not ready to act, give me a break and shut up.
TriStar really didn't invest a lot of money to merchandise The Running Man. A perfect example of this is the poster, with little color, and it focused on the star only to sell it. The book by Richard Bachman was already in stores, and of course, they released the soundtrack on cassette, but that was about it. TriStar didn't feel it needed to do anything except promote the trailer on television and pay for travel to have cast and crew promote the film, because Arnold would bring all the awareness they thought they needed, and it was honestly short-sighted. The box office for November 1987 was full of a lot of variety, but the champion at this time was Fatal Attraction, which held the #1 spot for over a month now, and it seemed to be unshakable. On November 6, a ton of movies tried to charge Attraction's top spot. The closest was the overly positive Shelley Long film Hello Again, which got the #2 spot, making $7.3 million. But like most movies of that time, it would fizzle out after a few weeks, making only $20.4 million. Less Than Zero would try to tackle drug addiction, while Charles Bronson was out killing again in Death Wish 4, The Crackdown. Kids took on The Russians in Ruskies, while Timothy Hutton and Kelly McGillis were Made in Heaven. Cry Freedom explored race relations in apartheid South Africa, but to be honest, my favorite movie of this week was an adult hiding out as a teenager in John Cryer's Hiding Out. On November 13th, Cross My Heart flopped with only $1 million on a $7 million budget, but to be honest, it opened on a week competing with a Schwarzenegger film, and The Running Man pounced everything, finally toppling Fatal Attraction for the #1 spot that week. In the second week, Running Man would continue to stay on the top spot, grossing close to what it did the first week. During the second week, there were several competitors, starting with Date with an Angel on November 20th, alongside Flowers in the Attic, and the outstanding epic The Last Emperor. Barbra Streisand went nuts, while Prince taught us The Sign of the Times. Then there was the follow-up to Teen Wolf, but like the rest of the films, it did not beat out Running Man. But on week 3, during November 25th, The Running Man was finally caught up to, as it dropped to a shocking 5th. It was dethroned by the powerhouse Three Men and a Baby, and the brilliant comedy masterpiece, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Then there was the little film called Housekeeping, which no one noticed. During the week of December 4th, no big movies were released, and The Running Man retained its #5 spot. But on December 11th, 2 more big movies would cause it to drop to the 7th spot. The first was Throw Mama from the Train, and the second was Oliver Stone's Wall Street. Also new this week was Steven Spielberg's Empire of the Sun. The death of The Running Man arrived on December 18th, when no less than 8 films arrived at the cinemas. Since there was little room, Running Man was often thrown aside to make room for the other films. Of the 8 movies, there were duds like the terribly unfunny Leonard Part 6, The Drama of the Dead, and the story of a homeless couple played by Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson called Ironweed. The 4 big movies for this week were Steven Spielberg's produced Batteries Not Included, everyone's favorite comedian Eddie Murphy was going raw, the amazing Albert Brooks film called Broadcast News with Holly Hunter, and one of my favorite actors of the 80s, William Hurt, and the charming and funny Overboard saw Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn in all of their glory. Great film. The surprise hit, though, was a movie I see every few years, and it is a must-see. Moonstruck, a romance with family, self-reflection, and love. It's such a good film. Just wonderful. I can't say enough about it. At the end of its run, The Running Man ended with $38.1 million domestically. It made some money, but not much. It was not as successful as the studio hoped, and part of the reason was they really didn't invest a lot to make it known to the world. When The Running Man released, the critics just hated the movie for the most part. It was dubbed in most critical circles as one of the most violent films of the year, and that it glorified violence. For example, the New York Times said the film was an engagingly mean, cruel, nasty, funny send-up of television. Siskel and Ebert didn't like the film either, stating it was boring, but they did praise Dawson for his performance. In the end, it was an Arnold film, and the truth was, the Times craved that, so the film was assured some measure of success. Had Arnold not been in it, it probably would have bombed hard. Now let's be honest, bloodthirsty games depicted in a dystopian future was nothing new by the time Running Man came out. We had the serious and gritty Rollerball, the hilariously sarcastic Death Race 2000. And to really throw shade on Running Man, there was a 1983 French film, The Prize of Peril, which was about a volunteer game show contestant that is hunted by 5 other game show contestants to the death. In fact, a lawsuit would later rule that the Running Man screenplay was plagiarized from that movie, and the Running Man would not be the last of this premise. It would be followed by films such as Hunger Games, Squid Game, and others, but my favorite dystopian game film to follow Running Man, in my opinion, was Rutger Hauer's 1990 Blood of Heroes. Running Man stands out a little from the others because it has a ton of charm compared to the other dystopian films, and that's because Arnold and Richard Dawson. Simply put, it's a charming action fantasy that doesn't try to be anything but a cheeky, sarcastic, and fun action film, despite what critics of the 80s said. The film doesn't take itself overly serious either. Take Mado Babyface March. It's one of the many cheeky jokes in the movie that gives it its charm, and the filmmakers don't try to display perfection in every detail within the film. As this helicopter attack scene wasn't uniquely filmed, it was simply adapted footage from King Kong because they ran out of money. Or how about this limp guard during the prison escape scene? It's clearly a dummy for those who are observant, but the movie is so light on itself that it doesn't matter. Why do I note these things? Well, because it's to remind folks that this is one of those films that doesn't need to be made into something bigger, even though there are some serious themes running inside the film. The first of these serious things is what Arnold Schwarzenegger stated while he was doing promotional interviews for the film. During one interview with Bobby Wygant, Arnold Schwarzenegger explained in detail that the ICS network was battling for ratings with other networks in the world and was currently number 1. The networks were paid by the government and to help keep the populace from rioting due to the disastrous conditions caused by financial depressions. The desire to keep the people glued to the television is publicly broadcasted and made available so people are distracted like what the Romans did with arenas. And honestly, it's kind of like what we see today. People are glued to screens and don't look at the world that much, and the algorithm tells them what to believe, and rarely do they stray from that algorithm, so it's hard for them to see different points of view. This brings us to the producers and directors' vision for the film. In all news scenes, they made the news shows glitzy. They stated the news was more about opinions and state desires rather than the truth. This topic was often discussed on the DVD commentary, and the logos and music for the Iraq War was cited as an example that their movie came true. They also noted that news today was close to state-run, with obvious leanings towards one party or another, and this is fact today, whether you want to believe it or not. CNN and MSNBC are clearly Democrat, while Fox is clearly Republican. Where's the middle ground news? And each side cites the other as the enemy to true news. So it puts people in groups, whether you like to see it or not. I know people in my life personally that positively hate people of a differing political side. And it's sad. And it's exactly what these news organizations want, to keep these people zealots for their channel. In the 80s, this kind of stuff was less obvious, and it makes the film very prophetic. I have to say, of all the commentaries I've seen on DVDs, The Running Man had some very thought-provoking thoughts and insights, and I'd highly recommend it to fans of this film, because this film is trying to say a lot about media and how it's used to control people, and that kind of makes this film kind of important. Now, I love the posters in the show's office, the hate boat rather than the love boat, which Richard appeared in one of the episodes. And if you notice, the other poster is Confess, and you see a man between two colors, red and blue. The one in the middle is a bad guy, which represents the character of Arnold, who isn't for one side or the other. Thus, the neutral people are the ones that are the villains in this society. The joke to speak to the president's agent was a nod to Ronald Reagan, who was actually an actor before he was president. And that brings my focus to Richard Dawson, who I believe is the best part of this film.
Don't touch the hair.
Anyone who has looked into this performer's life will discover how wonderful a human being he was to others, and his views were very empathetic. However, in this film, he flips everything. He is such a shit in this movie, and I love him for it. Honestly, this is my favorite thing Dawson has ever been in. And even today, every few weeks during dinner, when I have a day off with my better half, we watch Match Game from the 70s, with Dawson in almost every episode. Love that game show. Paula Abdul choreographed the dance sequences for this film. She had choreographed a lot of music videos for Janet Jackson and other artists, and this was her second screen credit. She used the Laker Girls to choreograph, and were purposefully made to be scantily clad and suggestive for this movie, because Glazer stated sex and violence go hand in hand, and are selling points in a lot of entertainment. So it made sense for him in the future, when society has no hope, manipulative networks would use sex and violence to tempt and distract audiences. And it works in this film, and it does work in real life as well. The audience is like a pack of dogs screaming for blood, which has happened all throughout history. The game was likened to Roman bread and circuses, and the audience will cheer for whoever is more successful. They don't care who dies. They only care that someone is good at killing. They don't care if it's propagandized sadistic stalkers or a criminal accused of slaughtering women and children. They only care that they have their distraction and a hero to root for. The fact that they are not disgusted by the inhumane nature of the show is irrelevant. As in Rome, death is entertainment for culture. And speaking of the violence in this movie, this is what Jesse Ventura had to say about it.
And I don't look at theater or movie violence in that much of a negative aspect, because to me, isn't it much better to go there and just fantasize and live the violence through the screen as opposed to living it in real life? And I think it's an outlet for people.
Now, if you watch this movie and think it's cheesy, well, the filmmakers deliberately made it cheesy. And that's the purpose. They thought modern television was cheesy, and therefore they translated it to the film. However, the filmmakers really tapped into something, because what they made is in correlation to the kind of television that many people enjoy today. Like people suffering in wilderness shows to see how much they can take, or shows that flat out try to gross out people by making them eat the most repulsive things, or lie in a confined space with bugs or other things crawling over them to stay in the game. You have to ask yourself, how far are we from The Running Man today? The movie was dead on to what audiences would enjoy. It really is a sober message The Running Man leans into. When Buzzsaw is introduced, try not to notice the thing he cuts is wood and already somewhat pre-cut to fall properly. Hey, we had to make this movie in a crunch, people. Now, the character of Dynamo was played by Erlen von Lith, who was actually an amateur wrestler and opera singer. His first film was The Wanderers in 1979, but if you love movies from the 80s, you should recognize him as Grossberger, who is far more threatening than Dynamo in Stir Crazy. He was so good in that film, and since Richard Pryor was my favorite comedian from the 70s, I really have a soft spot for him in this movie. Sadly, Erland would die on September 23, 1987, just under 2 months before The Running Man released in theaters due to a heart attack. The sadistic character of Dynamo sings the war cry section from Wagner's Flight of the Valkyries. Dynamo is just a pretender, though, because whenever he's in a pinch, he's a complete coward.
Cut! Go to commercial! Jesus Christ! I have no power! Cut! Go to commercial!
The real question I have is how the hell did Dynamo sneak up on anyone with this getup? Anyways, in the scene where Dynamo is trapped in the car, he actually pisses himself. And as a result, this is why his suit short circuits and lost power. How do we know this? Well, director Glazer says so himself in the DVD commentary. One of the tropes I loathe in horror or action is when someone is being chased by a monster or killer and they have no self-awareness to keep themselves from yelling so loud that anything could zone in where they're at. And that's exactly what Maria Conchita Alonso does in this scene. But beyond that error, I have to point out an error in this film, because how would the audience be watching Fireball burning? Because Whitman and Haddad's body were right next to him in that room, and the show would not want them seen to the public because it would expose their lie that no one can get free from this show. I know I note the positives and negatives in films, and it frustrates people, but I gotta be honest, there are errors in this film, but the question is, do such errors break it for you? For my answer, not at all, because this film is just popcorn fun, and therefore I take it as such. Notice the credits next to Killian as he stands next to the TV congratulating everyone. They have fun by thanking you, me, us, and them, and then it says, what's next? I don't know. And then it even has music by Do, Re, and Me. But when you watch the film in the next viewing, look for these credits, because there's more there I'm not mentioning. Wait, Mick Fleetwood is in the movie? Really? And his aide's name is Stevie. Can you guess who they're referencing here? At the end of the film, the audience is cheering Richards, either as a violent gladiator who appeased their bloodlust, or a man who just temporarily beat the system. As to which one or both, you decide, because I can bet you the military is going to swarm in on this area very quickly after this revolt. At the end of the movie, Sven Ole Thorsen, who was given the part by Arnold because they're best friends and workout buddies, finally got more presence in the film. Sven has been in a ton of Arnold films, and when on the set, the two would often throw competitive barbs between each other for fun. With the movie over, stay for the credits, because at the end you will hear a ton of announcement from ICS, whether talking about ICS uniform, gun ads, or so on. It's just a lot of campy humor. The Running Man was released on VHS on May 25th, 1988, and it garnered a cult following. And it's no surprise that when Arnold Schwarzenegger ran for governor, his campaign bus had the slogan, Running Man, on it. As for me, I was 15 years old when The Running Man came out and would gobble it up on VHS rentals shortly after it was released. Back then, any Schwarzenegger movie was a big deal for everyone, and I was no different. I loved the charm of this manly man, and we enjoyed our action back then. None of us really noticed the messaging of the film, as that kind of future seemed far away. Today, I like the film a lot, and it's a lot of fun. But the appeal of this movie is its sincerity. It just wants to entertain you, and it wants you to have fun. And you know what? It delivers. It's not perfect, but it works. And it's no surprise that over 35 years later, they made another Running Man. But that's a different story. For now, we're going to wrap up this video here. Next up will be Predators, which will premiere on December 5th. And if you want to see it early, you can get Patreon, as it will air on next Friday. I know some might have a bug about us waiting 2 weeks to do the next video, but it's Thanksgiving, and we want to focus on family. And I think they can get over it. Well, at least I think they'll get over it.
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Thanks for being here. If you like what you see, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps, and so does sharing. And please support us on Patreon.